Alright, so today what I'm going to do is go to my genealogy folder and go to the folders, and this is collected a lot of information over time. Today I'm going to do Chichester, and I'm going to go through look at Alfred Augustus Chichester, which is the son of John Birkenbein. And we're working my way back to Enoch, and then to David Chichester, who's married to Mary Nichols, and how I was able to solve the Enoch Chichester. And there were some really bad resources out there, and how I was able to get the marriage record for this, and also the marriage record for John Birkenbein, where this guy is buried. This was one of the tougher lines for me to work out, as was the Alfred Foster line, which I probably didn't cover as completely as I could, but I do have more information. In the day, I know I've got some. Sometimes birth records don't come from a birth certificate. In fact, if we're going back this early, birth records may be recorded in some church somewhere. I'll just say I've never found a birth record in a church for this individual anywhere. So how did I get the birth record? And I'll show how I get the birth record. And just different sources do different things. Some things are more useful than other things. Don't have a death certificate for this person. How did I get the death date? Where's he buried? These were all very tough questions. I did have a marriage record early on, so I started out having information from my own family. I'm not sure if I had the exact dates. I'm not going to look now, but I had Alfred Augustus Chichester, and I don't think I had a middle name for her, Margaret Vesey. And I knew they were both from Chicago. My grandfather was from Chicago, and there was a few stories related to my grandfather's life when he was young. One or two, that were passed down. I knew he was in Chicago. He was born in Chicago. His sister said they were from Chicago. Now what I don't have, which might be available, because vital records coming out of New York are pretty poor, is a marriage date, and I probably should say it was before 1880, because they appeared Mary in the 1880 census. So that's more correct than before 11 February 1882, but when you're doing genealogy, sometimes you can say the marriage date is before the birth of the first child. I never bother counting 9 months backwards, whatever. So, if I look in Alfred Augustus Chichester's files, this was the 1930 census. Which is poor. I'm just gonna look in his scan file. How about that? First some pages. So I started this. This is one of the first people I was trying to sort out. Who his father was. It wasn't until I had access to Ancestry and the census records came out that I was able to trace him back further. Yes, I'm gonna make this smaller. So if he died before 1940, he had a wife named Margaret, and he had more than children of Alexander and Helen. I will say that in my lifetime I've met this individual, Helen B., which is amazing, that my great-grandfather's sister. Of course, I've never met these people, but my grandfather had, and that'll be shown in the 1920 census, which is going to come up here. basically, between all the census records, I'm going to have general birth dates, and it's a poor copy, and we'll see that will. It's a transcription of it. This is actually Elfield Burgess, and I did, she's the daughter of Edwin Burgess. I did a video on, yesterday. Alright. Basically, when I go through these censuses, and I, go to 1900, and even go back to 1880, following, Alfred here. Eventually, I'm going to find him living in Brooklyn, Kings County, New York, with his father John B. and his mother Henrietta L., sister Sophia. Basically, those things work out in here. Now, according to there may be a growing number of descendants of Alfred Augustus. Of these 4 children, 2 went on to have children. Two did not. So this Alexander Vesey remained in the household for a while. Probably at about the time that he died. He died a few years before his father did. But he outlived his mom. They're all buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago. Went to visit that a number of years ago. This is my great-grandfather. So, in 1920, him, his wife, and Donald, maybe even Jane, were living in the household with Alfred here in Chicago. This Alfred is actually named after, and the Alfred keeps repeating in this line of Chichesters. It's actually named after this Alfred Augustus Sebring, who in turn I think was named after somebody else, but I'm not going to go there. The Veseys, I can't do much. I don't have much more information besides the fact that they were from Edinburgh, Scotland. I actually don't have a death date for him yet. Don't know where he's buried, and I don't know where Elizabeth McKay is buried, and I don't even know their marriage date. But I have a rough idea what the children were, and a lot of this had to do with working with the census. But let's go back to Margaret Vesey. So Margaret and Alfred moved over to Chicago. That's where she died. That's a little more straightforward. Let's get to John Birkenbein Chichester. It's a little bit tougher. This birth date I probably got from family records. This death date I got from the Chicago probate records. I have a copy of his will. I've transcribed it. I've got it in the notes. John Birkenbein, there's going to be more people who have descendants of John Birkenbein and Henrietta Louisa Sebring, and there's a brick wall on top of John Birkenbein that I'm going to explain. And there's an extensive ancestry for Henrietta Louisa Sebring. That goes back to the earliest days of New York, when it was New Amsterdam. So it's a good line to be able to follow and solve. Now, the source for their marriage record comes out of a book called New York Methodist Marriages. At least that's where I first found it. You may be able to find it in FamilySearch.org. To know that her last name was Sebring, at least the book disclosed that her last name was Sebring. Turns out, at the end of the day, he's buried next to his wife and to his wife's parents at I forget the name of the cemetery. I probably have it in my notes. Greenwood Cemetery, in somewhere around Brooklyn. All right, but I'll get to that eventually. So, okay, so I had this marriage date, and of course, by the 1850 census that rolled around, I was able to see there was, it was a David, there was a Sophia. Of course, this one unnamed child, I believe I probably got from Family Search. No, it's buried actually at Greenwood. Died like the day it was born. This oldest son died during the Civil War in the wilderness of Virginia, we're told. So the oldest surviving was this Henry Birkenbein. And Henry Birkenbein ended up moving to Chicago, and everybody else followed him. Okay. The source for the birth date for John Birkenbein is from his it's from his passport application. And he lists his date of birth, August 5th, 1823, at Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, on Alfred Augustus Chichester's death certificate, it lists his father's place of death as birth, Pottsville, Pennsylvania. So I'm going to go find that. All right, so here we are. This is his death certificate, Chicago, Cook County, Illinois. When did I get word of this thing? 1996. Wow. 20 years ago. Over 20 years ago. And it says the birthplace of his father was Pottsville, Pennsylvania. The birthplace of his mother was Brooklyn, New York. This is Margaret Vesey, John B. Chichester, his father. All right. So we know he was from, and Pottsville is right near Reading, Berks County, Pennsylvania. We could also see in the 1880 census, which I'll go back to. Actually, this is the 1870 census, and this is 1880 is just as valid, but this is from New York. Maybe it's New York City. I don't know. It says he was born in Pennsylvania. He read of the wife, born in New York, daughter Sophia. That ends up being Henry, but it says Harry, Pennsylvania, Mary, John, Alfred, which is my ancestor, and Robert. And family records had him born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Took a while to get all these actual birth dates because they don't actually come with just this birth date. Again, came from his passport application. I didn't get a birth record out of some church book from some, or Berks County civil authorities to say that, he's born in 1823 on that date and his parents were blah blah. So I had no idea who his parents were, but I had a guess at one point in my research. Now, if I've mentioned this already, I'll do it again. So, this youngest son died in the wilderness of Virginia during the Civil War. Sophia Louisa apparently stayed, actually, in Brooklyn. Don't know if she married. She married Abraham Doremus. And that's important because she is actually buried at Greenwood Cemetery, I believe next to Abraham Doremus. Let's see what my notes say here. Believe. Not sure about that. All right. And I was able to find a marriage date for them. Henry Birkenbein married Hannah Maria Allen, who was born in Pennsylvania, 1848. They had 3 children: Royal Allen, Edith B., and I believe Edith. God, is she Bennett? She married the Bennetts, and there's Alva Chichester Bennett and George Letcher Bennett. They was able to figure out Royal Allen. And I think I've since found out he actually died in Vermont. And I don't know who his second wife was. And the reason why I don't know who his second wife was, because this was her second marriage. I do have a marriage date. However, I didn't make a note of her original last name, and I didn't put a spouse there for her. Alright. Henry Birkenbein died almost immediately. Junior. So there were 2 children. They were, I guess these were twins. All right. Married Judith. Married to Mr. Gower, Walter Herbert Gower. Not sure of when they got married. I think they probably got married in Chicago. And there's a Herbert Chichester Gower and Ethel Howard Gower that I haven't followed up on any more than that. John Sebring married Maribel Taylor, and they had a Virginia Elizabeth, and I don't know what happened to her after I haven't followed up on it. There's my line. Then we have Robert H.T., who married Autumn Moore. That comes out of Illinois records, but I don't know if they had any children themselves. All these descendants, of course, descend from John Birkenbein Chichester and Henry Louisa Sebring. They were married in Brooklyn, and this family here has very deep roots in Brooklyn, actually. But I'm going to go up and explain how I solve things. So, of course, John Birkenbein Chichester was born before 1850. And unfortunately, as you can see from his marriage date, he moved out of the house before 1850. So I didn't have the pleasure of seeing him listed in a household with his father. The only lead that I had was that in the 1840 census there was an Enoch Chichester listed as living in Pottsville, with just a number of people living in a household. It wasn't until and I started putting the pieces together very slowly. It wasn't until very recently that I was able to get final confirmation of Enoch's in writing without just knowing it intuitively that John Birkenbein Chichester was, the son of Enoch Chichester and Sophia Birkenbein. I had information about Charles Edward Chichester, who was born in Pennsylvania. He wanted to become a minister in the I don't know which, maybe I got it in the notes, Presbyterian. They placed him down in Charleston, and then the Civil War broke out. So he actually became recruited as a Confederate officer, and he actually was in charge of the Union prisoners. If you look up Zouave and Civil War, you may actually find a picture of this guy. He's got a really huge grave in some Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston. There is another sibling that I may have figured out in my other Dead column, but unfortunately I don't have it. Or I may not have. The only reason why I've got a unknown here is because I think... Oh. There was someone else living in the household in 1840 that, you know, that I assume died between 1840 and 1851 when the census was taken for 1850, and don't know who that is. Haven't found that out yet. Two other daughters was Marianne and Mathilda. Let's see, Marianne haven't been able to follow up on yet, and neither Elizabeth yet. How did I even assemble this stuff? Well, at first I had this loose connection between John Birkenbein and Enoch, just based on geography. Okay, this guy's living, and you notice here he's got a death place in Connecticut. Anyway, that's where he's actually buried, but I'll get to that. So, I was able to find a newspaper notice for a marriage between Enoch Chichester and Sophia Birkenbein. It even says who the minister was. I think it was Reverend Pauley, going off memory here. And so I put the date in, and then once I found John Birkenbein's birth date, not too long thereafter, there comes my great-great-grandfather. So it still made sense, but I didn't really have absolute proof. Eventually, what ended up happening was that when Sophia Birkenbein died, she wrote a will. And yes, and I've transcribed it, got it in the notes. And it was probated, it was available on Ancestry, so I could find it. And in this, she not only names her husband Enoch Chichester, but she names John Birkenbein, Chichester, Mary Ann, Elizabeth Matilda, and Charles Edward Chichester in her will. And this was in 1851. So this might have been before the Civil War broke out. I have found no will for Enoch. That solidified it. So I had a marriage record between Enoch and a Sophia Birkenbein, and then when I had this will, this is the will of Sophia Chichester as it's listed. And then I get a bonus. There was a provision in her will that basically bypassed my great-grandfather and asked for the estate to be divided up between the children that were then living of John Birkenbein. There was some land. They ended up selling the land and dividing the funds up between all these children. So that definitely reinforced. Now I have a very solid connection and proof for all these things. I just may not have an exact birth date, but I had to hunt these things down as I got them. This I got from the passport application. Charles Edward Chichester is actually somewhat of a historical figure, but this sounds to be a little bit late. I may have got his birth date off of his gravestone. I may have had to do some math. Now, how do I know this Charles Edward Chichester down in South Carolina is the same? If you read about the Zouave cadets, it'll say that he was originally from Pennsylvania, and he was part German. You know, he knew how to speak German, right? This is a German family, Birkenbein here. Much like when John Birkenbein married these Dutch, although this family in 1840 was probably not still speaking Dutch. They were really strictly Dutch. I mean, strictly Dutch, with maybe a few ancient French Huguenots that had come into that line. And this family was strictly German. Okay, so I was able to place these people, not by a census, but by her will, her will record. I'd probably cobbled together some of these things at various times. I may have found, let's see, what else do we have here? Maybe she was still living in the household in 1850 with Enos. Okay, so she gets added. And same with Elizabeth Matilda. Both, I think, remained single for the rest of their life. And this one, was he still in the household? Yeah, he was. Living also with Enoch Chichester. And also he's got a book called A Gospel According to Seaman, a publication. Basically, it's this ministerial kind of thing where he talks about a story of how his ancestor who fought in the Revolutionary War got shot in his coat pocket, and he doesn't say that my father's name was Enos Chichester, but that also connects nicely there, and historically he's known to have been from Pennsylvania. Okay. But he also is in the census with his dad. Alright, so now, how about Enoch? How did I connect Enoch? He was going by Enos in the census. How do I know it's the same guy? This is before 1850. How do I connect him to David Chichester? What's going on here? He's said to have been a doctor. I don't know where he went to medical school. But, what's important, extremely important here, is math, actually. So, the Barber collection and some other transcribed set of records from Elijah Huntington in Stamford say he was born on July 11th, 1793. His death record here, if you subtract out 72 years and 18 days, from his death notice that's in the Philadelphia Inquirer saying he died at New Canaan, you come up to exactly July 11th. 29 minus 18 is 11, and it's still July, minus 72, 93. Worked out to the exact date. It's the same guy. Also in the early history, there's some other history of Schuylkill County where he lived in. There's a few snippets here and there. And for a while he's living in Trexlertown. He married Sophia Birkenbein. I found Elizabeth Neely's will. Elizabeth Neely is actually the mother of Sophia Birkenbein, and it names Enos Chichester as one of the executors, which was Sophia Birkenbein's husband. Same thing, tombstone inscription, which now is, you can find a death. Same thing, 72 years, 18 days. And I added Sophia Neely's will. We're good. So Sophia Neely Birkenbein's will. Sophia N. Birkenbein. Although her will be listed, of course, at Ancestry as Sophia Chichester, because she got married. All right, so let's go from Enoch. Of course, the birth record that here in the Barber collection. Son of David and Mary, born July 11th, 1793. So there's David Chichester, there's Mary Nichols is the father. So how did he get all this stuff? I don't know. This marriage record was in the Barber collection, the death record's in the Barber collection, birth record's in the Barber collection, and the death record's in the Barber collection. So happy about that. And a lot of these birth records are actually in the Barber collection. Didn't do a very good job tracking. Sometimes I did. Here's Enos Weekly that he married, but I didn't get them all, I don't think. Phoebe Lockwood, Allinson married Sally Weed. William married Arma. Don't know. I had to trace his census. Him in the census till 1870, and then he was just gone, as far as that I could find. Polly married a Samuel Dean. Mary Ann married a Carlisle Lockwood. Good amount of this information came from the Barber collection. Sometimes it was difficult to find the death date. A few of them are still unsolved. But Allinson is buried at the Pound Ridge Cemetery, the same cemetery that Enoch is buried at. All right, so David Chichester. All right. Let's go with that. So, of course, got the birth record from the Stanford that named David Chichester and Mother Mary, and there's a marriage record inside the Barber collection. There's no census. I haven't found a will for Jonathan Nichols. I haven't found a will for David Chichester. I don't believe. But he was a Revolutionary War pensioner. And also, his grandson, Charles Edward Chichester, chaplain of the Charleston Port Society, wrote something called For Promoting the Gospel Among Seamen. Abraham Chichester with four son David, Abraham, Nathan, Steve were in the Battle of Ridgefield. Armed when they hit church door, poking the coat or whatever. I don't know. Here's the transcription of their tombstones, which verifies their records in the Barber collection. Then we get basic information about his pension. His widow applied for it after he died in 1803. Or she applied for it in 1838. And she lived another year, and that was it. And a Polly Chichester signed an affidavit that the soldier had been enlisted at New Canaan. Then I got his birth record here. Born August 26, 1757. What a coincidence, right on the tombstone. So now we know that he was the son of Abraham, and they're in the same place. And there's a little snippet about the Hoyt family's point of view about this whole thing. Where the hell is the Hoyt? Well, Jerusha Hoyt was the daughter of Jerusha Stevens was the daughter of Jerusha Hoyt. And Jerusha Stevens and Abraham Chichester were the parents of David Chichester. A lot of this are all from the Barber collection, but let's just go back to David. I did say we have the tombstone, we have the vital record, blah, 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 blah. Son of Abraham, born August 20, same guy, right? So we're actually working back to Jerusha Stevens. Alright, so these birth records, I believe, are in the Barber collection. Yes, they are. And Martha Chichester married Benjamin Waring. Abraham married Mary Arnold. And there's also, I believe there is some local history that verifies all this stuff that I have not transcribed. Never lost my David. Nathan Chichester married Theodosia Webb. Susan married a George Benjamin. Done with the birth date for her. Jerusha married a David Warren. Samuel Chichester, born in 1765. We don't know what happened to him. And it's claimed he was baptized. So I gotta look. I may have enhanced this for the local history. That I transcribed, or there was some. So, and then there's a will for David Bishop. Enos was probably from the Bishop family. David Bishop is related because Abigail Bishop married Daniel Chichester, and they were the parents of Abraham. This looks like this came from the Chichester Heritage Book. I don't really rely on that. Will of David Bishop. The remainder of my estate, the money I reserved from, given to my brother James's widow, Sarah Bishop. To my sister Abigail's son, Abraham Chichester. Sister Abigail, son Abraham. So we have the vital records, we have the familial relationships, some wills to even reinforce that. And have I gone through all these? Or am I'm actually down here now, not there. What is it, David? Yeah, I went through all these. Martha, Abraham, David, Nathan, Mary, Theodosia Webb, Susan, George Benjamin, Jerusha, married David Warren. Samuel, we don't know what happened to, and that got me distracted. And we got Mary Chichester, that we don't know what happened to her. At least my records here. I may have figured that out elsewhere. Alright. Going back. Abraham was born August 5th, 1725, and that's from the Barber collection, son of Daniel Abigail. And he's named in the will. Alright, so we got Daniel Chichester and Abigail Bishop. Now I got an about. What's that all about? Well, that's always the problem, and I'm also going to go through the issue that as to whether where it actually makes it back to Britain, and how weak the evidence actually is. So, no birth record has actually survived. No tombstone seems to have survived that I've been able to find. And what I'm saying is that I'm placing him as the son of David and Alice as a guess. Certainly Daniel was living in in Stamford at one point. Some of the stuff from the Chichester Heritage book I've not been able to confirm, and there's a lot of information out. So the first thing that happens in 1722, they're married. Vital records for the children are all in the Barber collection. Married Rachel Roberts. Santa May married Jonathan Kellogg, and there's a book called Kellogg's in the Old World and New. And I might actually be able to get better information about Kellogg eventually. Abigail married John Slater, and then here's Abraham. He married Jervisha Stevens. Okay, so how do I get to David Nellis? It's a good guess. You kind of have to work down to see where they might fit, you know. I do have a marriage record for Elias at Stamford. When they recorded the birth records, they didn't see who the parent was over in Huntington. It did seem that this family would go between Huntington and Wallingford and New Haven. And these were both actually in New Haven at the time when New Haven was a colony, before it was split into two, one being part of Connecticut, one being part of New York. Let's see what we got for William Chichester's notes. I probably got this birth date from the Barber collection. I'm not sure. So you have to guess. The deal is that this James Chichester that was in Salem, this is a partial unknown for Porter. A lot of people say it's Eunice Porter, but it could be any of the three Porter sisters that were daughters of Jonathan Porter. Now, why is that not in there? There was a Jonathan Porter. I swear to God. They married. Jonathan Porter has a wife named Eunice and a daughter named Eunice and two other daughters. Jonathan Porter died and he was living in Salem. He sold his land to James in exchange for allowing his mother Eunice to go and drink freely and all that stuff. Eventually Eunice showed up in Huntington. And James Chichester is still responsible for her because he moved to Huntington, so she did. And before, I forgot the guy's name, but before it is horrifically complicated. I forgot the name of the guy, that Eunice Porter's father, but it doesn't really matter. Basically, once the father died, there was a probate. James Chichester was listed next to his wife as, you know, being one of the beneficiaries, but didn't say her name. We do know that James Chichester was in Taunton, Bristol County, Massachusetts before 21st April 1650. Now, Torrey's New English Marriages insist that he married Eunice Porter, but there's no evidence to support it was Eunice. It was one of the three sisters. The Eunice that's mentioned in the land deed at Salem. It's one of the earliest deeds actually at Salem that's no longer available online. Naughty you, Salem Deeds people, by the way. But I'll back up from that. That's for another day. They used to have the originals up there. Now they have some kind of replacement. So, luckily I did save a copy of all those deeds. At least I can get to them. The writing's horrible. It's not as good as the rewritten version, but I'd rather be able to see the originals because it's kind of cool. The writing is really, honestly, poor. In fact, I'm going to stop this for a second. Alright, so I saved these. There were 4 books, basically. They were in TIFF format. Here's the first page. I gotta wait for the GIMP to load up. Egads. Not the best quality, I will say. Probably why they decided to replace them. But, here's a deed. I don't know if this is to do with William. We're opening up with this thing here. This isn't much to prove. This is just kind of cool. So, this, when was this? Now the double dates are important here. So this is the 12th of the 2nd month, and I actually enhanced this damn thing with the GIMP at one point. It took a long time. 12th of the 2nd month of 1652, and of course the 2nd month of 1652 in double date years was April or May, not February. The year didn't change until March. Alexandra Field of Salem hath sold unto William Chichester. Yeah, that's supposed to be Chichester. Of Salem, his house and ground about it, and to be used for 5. Jesus Christ! I think it's a mortgage or something. Anyway, they look like that. So let me. Where's the important ones? That was for William Chichester, James's brother, who was there first. So let's look at this thing. No, that's not this is okay. Let's open this one up. And this is how it's supposed to look like, people. So if you get some deed that doesn't look like this, it means it's not the original. It means it's a bad thing. Actually, I'll go down here to 100. So this I used would get to get this thing. Would got it. 16th day of October, 1654. Jonathan Porter of Salem, planter, hath sold unto James Chichester his dwelling house with the land adjoining, being about 3/4 for and that the family that the said James, this is shall, not bull, it's shall freely allow and give malt, drink, and lodging unto his wife Eunice Porter during her widowhood, unto the said Jonathan shall in before, or, yeah, by a deed dated 19 the day of October 1654. I have translated this at some point. I probably should try to clean it up, make it look cooler like the other one, but basically get rid of all these things. Yeah. But you notice here's Torrey didn't notice this in his New England marriages, and it was frustrating. I was trying to actually write some stuff for NEHGS, and they wrote back to me and they said, well, Torrey's New England marriages said that, you have unknown Porter, and Torrey's England marriages says that Eunice Porter was the wife of James Chichester. I said, no, because this isn't the end of the story, bub. His wife is referring to Bueller, Porter, Jonathan Porter. She's the wife of Jonathan Porter, who may, during widowhood, need a place to stay and malt to drink. Okay, and there's other records in actually the Huntington Town records that actually show that the conclusion that I've drawn is true, so stick it up your nose. Alright, so let's go back to this. So we know there was a Porter, we don't know which one it was. I think wasn't Giles? No, it wasn't Giles Corey. Now, okay, I'll push pause. I'll look at my damn thing. Alright, so this is about as good as it's going to get. Now, the only... At the end of the day, this James Chichester, during his life, deeded some land to Jonathan and James. And James's birth record is actually recorded at Salem, and so is Elizabeth. And there's confusion about who's what over in Salem. David Chichester, we don't have a birth record for. However, for this David Chichester, he actually is known to have been married to an Alice. That is true. So they did get that right. And James Chichester actually died intestate. So David Chichester petitioned for probate. And what James had done before he died is he granted some land to his son James and his son Jonathan. And we know about Elizabeth because Elizabeth was from Salem. This birth record was actually in the Huntington Town records, but it's the only one there. David hadn't received his land before his dad died, and that makes me believe that he was not yet 18 when his dad died. Something seems wrong about that. Was it this James that had this is the one that's recorded at Huntington. This one's recorded at Salem. So this James is recorded at Huntington. He had some children, but that's not the one. So I better look at my little write-up here. And this does confuse some of the confusion. So, what we have is we have birth records at Woodworthy, Devon County, England, and Woodworthy is the birth parish, or the origin parish of the other Chichesters that came down to Virginia. In fact, a great majority of the Chichesters that are in America came out of this Woodworthy parish. It was a long time ago, but anyway. Their father, William Chichester Sr., was the youngest of three brothers who lived. Oldest brother Hugh inherited the manor, and when Hugh died, he basically left some money to his oldest son, but he asked that William not be forgotten, I believe. And I make note of the ages a lot here, because the gist of what I'm going to say is that age appropriateness is, and I may just do another presentation about this. So anyway, this David, who is married to an Alice at some point, seemed to have died at Wallingford. They were having children at Wallingford. Is that right? Is this what this William is? I have to look at the Barber collection. Damn it. I think I would have concluded this because David and Alice had a son named William at Wallingford, and that's not in Long Island. That's the other side of the river, which is now Connecticut, or not the river, but the ocean. Some were baptized at Huntington. I pretty much put them here because it just kind of made sense. The ages were kind of spaced right, and I still have about, so it's really messy. But I've supposed so far that my Daniel was the son of this David, because this David was the first guy that was known to go over into Connecticut, which is now Connecticut. Anything to back that up. This deed here is between his brother James, who had already received some land from his father, to David. They sold the land, and then it's supposed, this is probably from the Chichester Heritage book, there's nothing to back that up, and this may have been that I picked, these were kids of David because it didn't work for anybody else. It was really almost unexplained. I know he only had one that we know of child. He probably had more, but they're not listed, and so there's a bunch of orphan Chichesters that don't know who their parents were because they didn't keep records. This James, I think he had a will. And this is not in line with the Chichester Heritage book. I at least know the Chichester Heritage book doesn't work. Basically, the break is right here. This David and Alice, I know, were a son of this James Chichester. And the reason why I know it's the same James Chichester has everything to do with him doing age-appropriate things. Having children at the right time, having, dying at around the right age, being listed as James Sr. in Huntington Town records versus Jr., the fact that he had land in Salem, then he moved up to Huntington, and Eunice Porter, which is the mother of the Porter which he married, we don't know her first name, who I think was Giles Smith. God, I wish I'd found that thing. Hold on. Alright, found it. So, this guy named Giles Smith was Eunice Porter's second husband after Jonathan Porter died. And there was a statement related to the estate of Jonathan Porter that was filed May 1st, 1661, and actually Jonathan Porter moved up to Huntington as well. He bound himself to deliver Jonathan Porter's estate. His daughters Eunice, Elizabeth, and Mary. These are the three daughters. We just don't know which James Chichester, which of these three he'd married, but he is there listed as one of the people to sign on behalf of one of the three sisters, which basically is what happened. So where does that leave us now? We've got a ton of footnotes. Yeah, it's for another day. But we have a solid connection to the David, the James, and the Jonathan, and I am actually relying on the Chichester Heritage Book, I believe, with this claim that he was in Wallingford. Wow, man, I think I got this from the records of Wallingford. William Chichester 1, I'm going to look that up. Alright, so I found the darn thing. So, this is the petition of William Chichester. Of course, it would have been Chichester. This is back 1756. Basically, he was asking for reinforcements, and he was put in danger, and then when they came back, he was found actually murdered at Fort Hoosick. And somewhere it mentions that he was originally from Wallingford, I think. And that's the best that I have. That would and I tend to believe he's the son of David Nallis, because David Nallis was sent over, and that's it. I mean, that's as good as it gets with this connection here. These dates just seem to kind of make sense. This William that was killed supposedly had a son named James. And maybe I didn't include that in the scope of this GEDCOM because I just do the ancestors and related people. So basically, in general, it ends here. There's no real solid proof. But it's pretty much a no-brainer. He descends from this James up here, the very deepest Porter. This vital record comes from Woodworthy. All of his... He shows up in Taunton being at the right age. There was a census of arms-bearing people at some date. There's a clear connection from Salem up to Huntington. He's known as James Chichester Sr. in the Huntington records in general. And James Chichester Sr.'s death was recorded in 1696. And then after that point, his son was baptized, or maybe born at Salem. That much is known. Except for David, I don't think. Yeah, if it was this James, you would actually have or this Elizabeth, or if I was a descendant of one of them, I would actually have a trail that would go back further. But this David married Alice is assumed because they were hanging about, or actually no, it is known because of this deed. They were hanging about up in Huntington. What we don't know is who their children were. And there's no real death recorded for this David Chichester, but there's a lot of deaths that aren't recorded, a lot of births that aren't recorded in Huntington, New York. It wasn't until later that the Huntington, the records of Eben Using Prime started including birth records for Chichesters. I'm pretty sure that William Chichester was born in Wallingford. Maybe I should probably look and pause, see if I can find it in the Barber collection. All right, not too great, but basically here's Chichester, son of Samuel, supposedly dying in 1756. Okay. So, there's another Chichester birth. Okay, we're going to just pause here, so I don't have them in the right. All right, so here's as good as it gets. This is the biological commemorative biological record of Fairfield County, Connecticut. There's a biography of Henry Chichester, who seemed to know that Abraham and his brother Daniel. Supposedly they removed from New York, but I mean, no, they were born in Stamford. His father, though, who had married Abigail Bishop, could have moved from New York. And this David and Alice, they're barely mentioned. In other accounts. Which I'm going to look for further. Yeah, best I can say about this is these people lived. They were kind of hanging out in Connecticut, and so I've just decided that David and Alice went to Connecticut based upon unsupported assertions. Where the the Chichester Heritage book says that he moved to Wallingford in New Haven County, Connecticut in 1705. Which I have incorrect labels unknown. So that ends there. To get this original James Chichester back, which goes a hell of a long ways, this is really frustrating. William Henry Drake has the family documented up here until up to Hugh here, and this William was originally proposed as the William that came over to Salem, but I'm not convinced that he is. I think he stayed, and instead his son William and his son James were the ones that came over. William dying in Virginia, leaving a pathway for this John to eventually, maybe one of these to eventually. But anyway, here's the James. I know I did a very good job. I'm just gonna stop right now.